What's your best true spooky story? Serious? This is weirdly wholesome. Removed. That's what I was gonna say. Maybe it'll stop him from poking around all the time. Lol, maybe not give the ghost who can move things a knife. What the hell, man, this is creepy as shit. There just happens to be someone else with the same creepy experience of this dog drop place, and the fact that he won't talk or mention it. What if you told him about this post? I was actually thinking of messaging him a link to it. I'll see what happens. Yup, Citrus County, I believe. I think he called it dog drop it. He is a caver and loves it. Goes to places all over the country to go diving and caving. He lives in Florida and that is literally the only place he will not talk about. He has pics and videos of other places he's been. Every place he's been actually, except that place. If he has any pics or video of it, he never shows it. I don't know what happened there, and he's talked of getting creepy feelings in places, thinking he saw things, being scared because the places he was in are dangerous. At his close calls, he has no problem talking about them. For some reason, though, this place he just will not say any more than that he will never go there again. And he tells others not to go there. I've posted this on my other account, copying and pasting it here. The scariest thing I've had happen while camping. So I live in Eastern Oregon, and my mom lives in Western Oregon. I went to visit her for the summer and she's very outdoorsy, so we decided to take the 1-hour drive from her city to the coast. We end up at this free campsite at the top of this hill, huge foothills of the coastal mountains. About a 25-minute drive from the top where the campsite is to the bottom where the main road was, and we were the only campers there. We relaxed for the rest of the day, made food, etc. A truck full of men drive up the hill and talk with my mom. IDK, what about? Wasn't suspicious at the time. And they leave us. Fast forward to the middle of the night. I wake up to my mom sitting straight up in the tent. I wake easily, so I heard her gasp and it woke me. As soon as she saw I was awake, she put her hand over my mouth because I was starting to ask her what's wrong. It was dead silent and all of a sudden you hear footsteps right beside the tent. The little flap that covers the zipper was even moving. Thankfully my mom has quick wits and said very loudly, "Kenny, grab the gun." Kenny is my dad, although that doesn't matter, and mind you he was not there, just us girls like I previously said. They left. No harm was done. Thank the Lord for my mama. TLDR. 2 girls at a campsite alone. People outside tent in the middle of the night and my mom pulled some badassery. Your mama is a quick thinking badass. Ugh, humans are the scariest. They really are the scariest horror imaginable sometimes. Removed. I was camping in a valley by myself with no cell service. I stayed late on a trail and ran into a nice local dude as it was getting dark. He showed me a local camping spot close to the road and the river, but camouflaged. I had a fire, drank beer, and listened to my friend's comedy podcast. I was loud and visible. Because it was dark already, I decided to sleep in the back of my truck under my topper next to all of my gear as opposed to setting up my tent. The next morning I made a fire, cracked a beer, and started making breakfast. Then I notice that there is a man at the edge of my camp. He comes closer, but never looks directly at me. This dude looks homeless, has a long ratty beard and has at least 100 plastic grocery bags tied all over his clothes. I comment about how nice the day is. No response from him. I offer him breakfast. Nothing. He sort of paces around the perimeter of my camp. I offer him a beer, but he just turns around. The dude is just standing there back to me wandering around. I'm realizing that there isn't going to be any good happenings. I had my bear spray and buck knife super close. I give him an ultimatum. Motherfucker, you are either going to acknowledge me or leave immediately. He ignores me. I grab the bear mace and walk a few steps towards him. He sulked away and I threw my shit in my truck and left that place right quick. I wonder if he had watched me during the night, and I thank my laziness for staying in my truck instead of a tent. I could never camp alone. You're ballsy. Posted this in another thread but seems appropriate here. Edited slightly to fit thread. I have had several dreams similar to what I am posting. I've been a caver in Florida for about 13 years, since I was about 6, and have been to a lot of caves. Never been afraid before this to go in one. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I started having this reoccurring dream. I would have it at least twice a year, always the same, even though I would realize I was dreaming after the first few iterations. I would fall asleep and dream of being in a cave and going into this little hole in the bottom. Inside I would see a 10-15 foot long corridor about 2-4 feet high. At the end it would always turn left, and I always saw a bent red stop sign at the end, like someone ripped off the top 2 feet and tossed it in. But I would always follow the corridor. I would turn and walk past the sign despite being scared, despite many times knowing what was there, and the corridor would start descending, quickly opening up into a large vertical chamber with the path leading down in a corkscrew. Everything became blurry at this point, but it was always the same. I saw trash scattered on the walls. I saw the pit leading down to a curved floor. I saw things, undefined, animals or people or something else at the bottom. And I saw my family, each with one of the things, being tortured and killed, every time, and I could never do anything. After I saw that, I would be stuck for a few seconds until I felt more than saw everything turn and look at me, and I would wake up. Not like a normal dream where you just drift to consciousness or a nightmare where you bolt up in fear, but like something pushed me out, like I wasn't supposed to be there. So I have this dream multiple times a year until I turn 15. I did tell a friend about the dream before. What happens next? My father decided to take us to some caves we never had been before, one of which was Dog Drop. It was likely named so because someone either threw their pet in there or a coyote fell in and the body was later discovered. Dog Drop had a roughly 30-foot rappel straight down to enter. I went down with my brother while my father waited up at the top. There was a hole in the ground. I started to feel uneasy though I didn't know why, so I followed my brother into the hole. I felt worse as I moved down, and when I looked up I saw the same corridor, the same turn, the same wall, the same bottles at the corner, and I instantly was hit with this overwhelming sense of nausea and fear and being watched, and everything was screaming at me to leave. I froze and must have made some noise because my brother turned around and asked what was wrong. I managed to say I wanted to leave now and climbed out as quickly as I could, followed immediately by my brother. We packed up and left. Never have gone back and never will. Haven't told anyone what actually happened. Just said I wasn't feeling well, and they forgot pretty quickly. The thing that really makes it creepy for me is I have never had the dream again. Year after year I would have it consistently, but it just stopped after that. But I still remember it all. And I still feel afraid, almost an external fear, when I think of it. Previous edit for safety. I saw some people talking about looking up the cave visiting. Just want to say, never go caving, especially in an unfamiliar place, without a guide who belongs to local group. If you belong to another group but have never been in the area, it's best to talk to local one before leaving. Caving is dangerous and people die. Don't be arrogant and try and rappel on a garden hose. Yes, someone did that. Yes, they died. The local grotto you can check out is called the Tampa Bay Area Grotto. And yes, the initials are BAG. I too have a recurring dream about a specific place, the woods on some land that my grandparents used to own. I would spend a couple of weeks there every year until I was probably 12. After my grandmother passed away, I would have the same dream in which I would just sort of be walking around the property looking for something. I strongly feel as if I won't have closure unless I go back. The woods are lovely, dark and deep, but I have promises to keep, and miles to go before I sleep, and miles to go before I sleep. Thank you for reminding me that poem exists. Reading it as a depressed mid-30s person for me was so much more impactful than as a high school student. I really needed that excuse to cry. Tears born of poetry are a salve. I think I know what cave you're talking about. Never been there, but knew someone who had. He called something similar or the same. Dog Drop or something like that. He doesn't talk about the place much, but he never goes into detail more than saying he will never go back there. Was the cave in Florida? Glitch in the Time Matrix. I lived in an old apartment in 2002. The place was built in 1900, so it was just over 100 years old when I moved in. The living room and kitchen were fine, but the bathroom and bedroom were unnerving. Like I just always felt like I was being watched, especially in the bedroom if the closet door was open. Those unnerving feelings just became moderately uncomfortable as I settled in. I felt safe in the bedroom, but only if the door was locked. One night I was dead asleep when there was a loud bang on my bedroom door. When I got up the courage to get out of bed, I checked the apartment and all the windows were closed and locked from the inside. The door still had the chain secured. No one was in there. I mentioned the closet in the bedroom. I never liked going in there, and I never liked if the door was open. For some reason, in my head I would hear gasping noises. So for that reason, the closet stayed closed. A month or more after I was woken to the bang on my door. I was dead asleep, but something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew some was standing over me. When I could finally turn on a bedside lamp, no one was there. After then I couldn't sleep in the dark. I had to sleep with a lamp on. That incident scared the life out of me, and after that the unnerving feeling of being watched intensified. Friends would come over and comment about being uncomfortable in the bathroom like being watched. It became so uncomfortable for me. When I had the chance to move to another unit, I jumped at it. I packed up and got out. After me, several people rented the apartment, and they would move out within months. I became friendly with the building manager, and I told him that I felt the place was haunted. He kind of laughed it off. Years after, they were renovating the place. Building manager was doing some painting in there. The building owner was there too. I went and checked out the apartment, and it looked nicer. It didn't feel as creepy. I got to talking with the building owner, and through the course of conversation he just throws it out there that a former tenant committed suicide in the closet by hanging themselves. He also mentioned that the original designer of the building lived in that apartment, and died in there. I wasn't mad when I heard that, but felt validated that what I experienced was real. But something woke me up, and it was a pressure on me like being held down. It was pitch black in my room. I couldn't see anything, but I knew some was standing over me. When I could finally turn on a bedside lamp, no one was there. Not sure about the other stuff, but this could have been sleep paralysis. Not trying to discredit your feelings of unease, but it happened to me once and it's the scariest feeling in the world. When my grandparents bought their house for a family of 10, my grandpa found a fake wall upstairs. He tore it down to make more room for the family. Behind the wall were children's clothes and play toys, almost like they walked off the room in a hurry. My mom told me stories of sitting in her room and something circling the walls around her sounding like wallpaper being torn. When she moved out, my aunt moved into the same room. She would wake up with pictures she hung up laying on her chest in the morning. My cousins also have stories of hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping outside their door in the middle of the night. I still don't go upstairs at their house because it's always cold and I get weird vibes up there. Even in my adult life I have scary dreams that take place in their upstairs. This is for real terrifying. I might be a wuss, but this would be enough to make me sell me house and just get out of there. It is weird. The upstairs is always cold and I hate going in the room that was behind the wall. Just doesn't feel right. I'm a grown-ass man and stay away from upstairs. Dude, I grew up in a big old house and your stories sound just like mine. I have hundreds of them. So many weird things happened there. One night me and my little brother slept in my sister's room on her floor. Kind of like a Friday night sleepover when we were kids. When we woke up the next morning, the mirror from her bedroom wall had been taken off and was now between me and my brother. I woke up staring into my reflection. I still get the chills when I think about all the stuff myself, my friends and family saw there, including the ghost of an old man that was seen 3 times in my bedroom, once by myself. Great. I found a boarded up room in the house I just got. I'm going to fix it up into additional living space. Going to worry about ghosts now. Like the dark long room with the creepy ass bouncy horse and bassinet wasn't weird enough. Why are there no lights in there? It's already cold and I don't even want to clean it. WTF room. Edit. Shouldn't have read this shit or anything. Walked out to the car to get something and noticed curtains pulled across a window upstairs. That wasn't like that a few days ago when I took photos and I have the stairs boarded up currently. WTF. He lives in the long room. He doesn't like the light. Yeah, well, he'd make the rules if he got a job and pulled his weight around here. Have you ever read the story The Yellow Wallpaper? The part about circling the room and wallpaper being torn kinda reminded me of it. In the story there are no actual ghosts, but that part is related in a way. Edit. Here's a link. If you're interested. The Project Gutenberg ebook of The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman webpage. While at uni my friends and I ran out of booze. Hardly any shops were open because it was late on. So the only option was to walk the mile or so to the nearest 24-hour supermarket. Between the supermarket and the dorms we lived in was just row after row of suburban houses which all looked the same. As we were walking down one road we passed a field with a large campfire and some people riding horses around it. There were people playing musical instruments, and general sounds of a good time going on. The horses and fire, and the lanterns which were dotted about, gave it a very old-fashioned feel. Maybe 5 minutes after passing the field, now walking past houses again, one of my friends commented on how weird and out of place that gathering of people had been. My other friend and I had been thinking exactly the same thing, so, curious, we turned around and walked back to find out exactly what was going on. There was nothing there, not just no people or horses, there was no field, just more and more houses. Even though we were absolutely certain we were on the right road, as we'd simply turned around, we walked up and down the neighboring roads too. We found nothing. We weren't drunk, though we'd had some drinks, and so I've got absolutely no idea what happened that night. Removed. 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 Where have I read this before? This story sounded like it came from there. There are other stories of people who have had similar experiences. The most famous one is of two sisters in the very early 20th century, both claiming to have somehow walked into the 18th century when visiting Versailles. Lucky that they didn't offer you, and you accept, any food. You probably wouldn't be here to tell the story. According to legends, pretty much any story involving running into the fair folk warns against eating food they give you, cause then you can't leave fairyland, or the underworld. Removed. Honestly, since they are magic, I'ma assume that is some damn tasty stuff. I don't really wanna be some magic dude's human pet though. I'll take one for the team if they keep the food coming. Haha, maybe they've got Reddit. I am a house pet for my fairy overlords. AMA. I don't have a specific link, but there are legends surrounding the fair folk, and the idea that if you accept their food or drink you will be spirited away. Some ties in with alien abductions if you want to go deep. The podcast Mysterious Universe often has discussions around these things if you're keen. A family friend of mine and her sister were once walking their dogs through a huge empty field, and they noticed an older looking man coming towards them on an even older looking bike, wearing clothes from what seemed to be the 1930s. He looked right at them, smiled and said, "Good morning ladies," and they just smiled and nodded as he passed them. They both turned to look around at him no less than 30 seconds later, to see no sign at all of him. Very odd. My granddad had a similar experience in the 1940s. He was cycling late at night down a road in North Yorkshire and came upon a man on horseback dressed in older garb. He said hello to him, but the man didn't reply, and they rode along together for a short while. The man suddenly wasn't there anymore and he cycled home in a fright. He ran inside white as a sheet, and my great-grandfather took one look at him and asked him if he'd seen the horseman. Yo WTF, this type of story happens in Mexico so much. The horseman is described as the caballero vestido de cuero, which translates to the gentleman dressed in leather. What you describe is eerily similar to what happens in the stories. The guy is dressed in black and rides a black horse and is very handsome. Oh damn, Mexico got hot ghosts. I have an uncle that experiences things like this fairly regularly. He's a pretty serious guy and not one to make things up, so I believe him. One of the stories, for instance, was that he was driving down a country road after shopping and saw a family walking on the side of the road in the middle of summer in St. Louis, so it was hot. But the family was all wearing odd clothes, and the first thing he noticed was none of them wore shoes. The clothes were more like shawls or wraps. It was a man and woman with a child, so he stopped to offer a ride since it was hot as shit and they were in the middle of nowhere, and they agreed, and the man said their house was just a few miles down the road. So he drives them up and drops them off at a little cottage-like house on the side of the road. A few weeks pass and he's with my aunt driving, who he had told this story to, and he said, "Up here is the house I dropped that family off at," and when they got up there was no house. No nothing. It was just the ditch and grass. Nothing was ever there, so who knows? I'm super skeptical about anything like that, but the fact that it was him that told me and my aunt corroborating it made me wonder. My auntie had a similar thing in York. It only happened for a couple of minutes, but she was suddenly back about 400 years. That first sentence is a horror story in its own right. Oh, sounds like a time slip. There are lots of stories out there like yours. The whole subject is fascinating to me. It's a hell of a rabbit hole to go down into. Wow, maybe it's like in The Hobbit, you know when they see lights and heard laughers like people's having good times in that forest and all of a sudden it all turned dark and quiet again. You just walked on elves having a party. Love this story. Thanks for sharing. I have a similar story. I was 7 years old when my family had moved to a neighborhood in a more rural area. My backyard backed up to a farm. My brother was 10, and we were exploring our new street the day after we moved in. It was early spring, mid-afternoon, and all of a sudden we see someone in full traditional riding gear riding a giant horse up our empty street. Not galloping, just a casual stroll. When they went past us, can't remember if it was a man or woman. They didn't look at us and silently continued by. Not totally unrealistic that someone would be doing that since I did grow up in an area with lots of horse farms, but the farm behind our house was not an active horse farm. They had like one cow and grew corn mostly, and they were coming from the direction where the road dead ends into the woods. My brother and I decided that it was definitely a ghost. At the time I was around 14. I'd asked my dad to wake me up early that morning at about 5 AM because I had some work to get done. That morning, I was woken up, and I flung my legs over the side of my bed. I felt a tug on both of them. What I thought at the time was just my dad trying to get me to hurry up. I reached over to pick up my phone and turned it on. 3:30 AM. And I looked over at the black figure I assumed was my dad and it was gone. Something similar happened to me. I was about 11 and I saw my dad standing in my doorway staring at me at like 4 AM. I was so confused because he almost looked mad, so I called out to him. No response. I blinked and he was closer. I blinked again. He was at the foot of my bed. I pulled my covers over my head and started screaming. Also IDKY, but doppelganger dad had boxes with flamingos on it, and when my parents came running to my room, he had on his Flintstone pajama pants. I asked and apparently he does not in fact own flamingo boxers. Back when I was a kid my grandmother had a really close friend who used to help her babysit us. One day she goes missing. Family doesn't know where she is and we don't either. About a week later police find her body in a dumpster. She had been dead for 4-5 days. She had been mugged and had several stab wounds. Incredibly tragic. Who would mug an old lady? Here's the spooky story. A few days just before she was found, my 3 cousins swore they saw her walking around in their backyard and knocking on their window. The following day had search going through the area. It wasn't until the body was found that we realized what they saw couldn't be true according to police timeline, but they swore it was her. Edit. I'm adding more context for the story. I initially kept it brief because I didn't want to have a wall of text, but since this blew up a bit, I'll include more details. The backyard was actually pretty big and long because it was shared by the entire apartment complex, which had 4 units, 2 upstairs, 2 down. My cousins were in the downstairs unit on the left. Again, like I said in a different post, it was gated on all sides by wooden fencing. My cousin's window had blind spots so you couldn't see the entire backyard. It wasn't nighttime, but the sun was setting. They said it was almost down at this point, so I assume around 7 PM. They are in their room, which has a window that sees into the backyard. It was ghetto and they were pretty poor, so their beds only had the mattress, not the frame supporting it. It was a queen and a single pressed up against the wall with a window. So basically, to look into the backyard, you were standing up on a mattress looking against how you normally face, back against the wall, sitting down on the mattress. Youngest brother, holy shit, there's someone in the back. She just walked away. Oldest, laying down on the bed. WTF are you talking about? Youngest, dude, it looks like old lady. She's walking around where grandma's vegetable garden is. Oldest, youngest, come fucking look. She's just walked away. Oldest, goes and looks. I don't see anything. Stop being stupid, goes back to laying down. Little one stands there looking at him. Middle brother comes to look a moment later. Oh shit, she's right there. WTF, she's coming to us. They all look to see the lady knocking on the window. They scream, panic and run out to Dad. Dad obviously doesn't believe them, but after a bit gives in. He goes out and checks. Nothing. So just a side note, the way these apartments were connected, you couldn't go into the backyard from your individual unit. You had to get out into the main hall, which had a door that opened into the backyard. All I can imagine while reading your post is the old scary woman saying SHHH from the movie Shutter Island knocking on the window JDBDKSNDKDSNKSBDKDND. 4 years ago, I lived in a very large farmhouse that was converted into 2 apartments. The house was known as the Old Boys Home. It was used to house boys with behavioral issues but was closed due to allegations of molestation. Anyway, I was living with my boyfriend and 3-year-old daughter at the time. My bedroom had a large fireplace that had been boarded up and painted over. I decided to push my bed up against it one day while I was rearranging things. It was like a headboard. That night, around 1 AM, I had heard a small voice saying Mommy. I had sat up in bed but didn't see anything, so I reached over my boyfriend trying to grab my daughter and put her in our bed. I kept feeling around and I was still hearing the voice but I couldn't feel her. My boyfriend woke up and turned the bedside lamp on, asking me, "What the hell are you doing?" I explained that Amelia was trying to get in our bed and I was reaching for her. There was nobody there. My daughter was sound asleep in her room. Then the next night came. Around 1 AM again, my dog had started to whimper at our door, so my boyfriend got up to take him outside. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you, where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back? I felt that, so I assumed my boyfriend had come back to bed. I rolled over. My boyfriend wasn't in the bed and I felt the fucking bed release pressure. Whatever was laying next to me has gotten up in that second. I moved my bed the next day to the other side of the room and I never had another incident in the 2 years I remained in that house. Screw moving the bed. I would be out of that room. Have you posted this story before? I'm pretty sure I read it before because I remember the fireplace in the room. Yeah, I have. So a little more story on moving the bed. There was a floor vent right next to this fireplace that led to the basement. The basement was shared by myself and the other apartment. We just stored holiday totes and bicycles in there. The vent led down to the showers in the basement, which was just a large room with 5 or 6 shower heads on one wall and a drain in the middle of the room. It just had a really creepy feel to it, so I thought maybe it was me pushing my bed near that vent. I don't know. I would love to talk to the new tenants to see if they've had anything happen. Voices travel well through air vents. Maybe you were hearing the other tenant's kid or your own kid in her room. Yeah, how do you explain the demon spooning her? Removed. You know that feeling in a bed when someone lies down next to you, where the bed pushes in and there is a warmth in your back? I don't. I never see these until my post will be at the end, but this was weird. My wife and I were having a great weekend in Las Vegas when my father-in-law passed away in the early morning hours. We get the call and haul us to get back to the rest of the family. After a couple of hours the family is all together and talking, sharing memories when we arrive. Shortly after we arrive it gets brought up, how are we going to share this news with our niece, who was in prison at the time? While trying to figure it out, a call comes from out of nowhere. It's our niece and she asks what happened to grandpa. She had a dream that he visited her and said goodbye. She freaks and calls us. Weird. I went to use the bathroom at work and when I entered, there was no one in there. The bathroom has 4 urinals and 4 stalls, 1 handicap, and I did not see any feet in any of the stalls. I took up my normal spot inside one stall and was doing my business when I heard the sound of someone peeing into one of the urinals. But no one had entered the bathroom. The door is heavy and loud when it closes, so I would have heard someone entering. After a normal amount of time, the peeing stopped, and I heard a few footsteps, but the door never opened. When I finished up I did a cursory look and there was no one in the bathroom. It's a ridiculous story, but I definitely heard a pee ghost. Are the male and female bathrooms right next to each other? If the walls are thin or sound carries, maybe you just heard the forceful pee of a co-worker in the women's room. At my old job, you could hear the guys farting through the walls. Sounded like they were in there. Nope. Female bathrooms are way down the hall. The only rational explanation is a ghost with a full bladder. Agreed. My wife and I stayed at a nice hotel in downtown Pittsburgh. It was where I asked her to marry me after a lavish meal. I picked the room because it came with a huge Japanese soaking tub that me, a 6'1" man, could barely see over the edge of. Anyway, the first night we stayed there, we were sleeping in the single king bed. I believe the alarm clock said it was 2 or 3 a.m. To my left, and just a few feet from me, I heard the sound of what seemed like a pencil slowly rolling down a slope surface. It was so deliberate and loud that it woke us both up. It was also so deliberate that, while my heart thumped in my chest from the sudden noise, I quickly convinced myself that it was a pencil sliding off the desk in our room and I went back to sleep. The next morning, to my surprise, I found that A, there were no pencils in the room, and B, there was no desk. It was my first night in the room, so I assumed that it, like other hotels, had a place to sit and write. Well, that was not the case. The only thing I could find to write with were ballpoint pens with their caps on. They wouldn't make that distinctive, loud noise that a ridged, wooden pencil makes as it rolls. Furthermore, there was no slope surface in the room for anything to suddenly roll off of in the middle of the night morning. The whole thing was weird enough for us to talk about it that morning. I do not believe in ghosts, but to be honest, I'd love to encounter something unexplained. I entertained the idea of a ghost pencil, but knew in my head it had an explanation grounded in reality. But that's not all that happened. That night we were both in the soaking tub. The water was up to my chin. It was great. We were in the middle of February, a cold and miserable month in Pittsburgh. We were sloshing around in the tub having a blast, pretending we were rich, and then, from the other room, we heard the buzzing of an old microphone hooked up to a PA system. Basically, that sound of feedback that precedes an announcement. The whole room filled with the buzzing sound of microphone feedback. Our hearts thumped in our chests yet again. And then we both practically jumped out of our own skins. We heard the distinctive sound of someone blowing into a microphone to test it. Huatooth. You could see it in your head, it was so distinctive. Just like the pencil. My heart went from thumping wildly to thrumming like a hummingbird's. Naked, I leapt from the tub and threw a towel around myself. That was a man blowing into a microphone, I said. My wife stayed in the tub, scared and quiet. I searched our room and did not find a speaker, or any kind of speaker grill embedded into a wall or the ceiling. We could not for the life of us find a potential source for the sound other than an iHome speaker that was already playing music from my iPhone. So that was our story. We still had one more night. We were exhilarated by our engagement and the ghosts that haunted the hotel. A week later I had the thought to email the hotel. I asked them about their building. Pittsburgh is an old town, and downtown Pittsburgh is a very, very old town. They got back to me and explained, as my jaw dropped, that they used to be an old telephone factory. I don't know why I found meaning in that explanation or why it made everything click so well, but my thoughts immediately went to the sounds of a factory, the PA system, the drafting table, or relics from another time in that building's life. You win. I'm never fucking sleeping again. Reminded me of a time I thought I was dreaming. I must have been barely 5. I woke up and someone was tapping my head. I looked up, and my grandma was staring at me with the scariest, creepiest smile on her face. I flung myself away, looked back up, and she was gone. Reading this at 1 a.m. was a terrible idea. Dear God, I'm terrified right now. Won't even lie. I turned on the flashlight on my phone and did a quick scan of my room. What if I turn the flashlight on and see a face? Then you're done for. But at least you'll know. This just happened to me 2 days ago. I was walking into the house after work around 6 p.m. so it was already mostly dark. And suddenly the entire sky lit up bright green. And there was a super loud zap sound just like a movie laser or something. Right over my head. So loud that I hit the deck and then fucking tore ass back into the house. One of my roommates was cooking dinner and I was like, what the fuck? Did you fucking see that? But he didn't. We went back outside. No transformers near or out. No house's electricity out. No sign of disturbance at all. Now I'm a rational grown man. A believer in science and always that there must be a rational explanation for this guy. But this was truly a mindfuck and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it since. If a transformer blows, it'll light the sky for miles around. We were out in the desert and saw one blow from about 8 miles away at a nearby town and it looked like a nuclear explosion. Probably a transformer explosion. They're nuts, and super scary if you don't know what it is. but they do happen pretty regularly, and are a giant pain in the ass for the utility company to fix. I really love these threads, but never leave a comment. I'm from Scotland, and when I was a child, my mum and dad took my sister and I on a trip to Fort William, which is a town up in the Highlands. People go there for skiing and hiking. It wasn't winter, so we were there to do some easy hiking. My sister and I were quite young, I was about 11, and to stay for a couple of nights. I can't remember the name of the hotel we stayed at, but I do remember that it was old-fashioned, and we were all in one room together. There was a single bed, where I was sleeping, a double bed in the middle, my parents were there, and another single on the other side, my sister's. I was often frightened when I was a girl. I didn't like the dark, and I was super scared of the possibility of ghosts etc. I never found it easy to sleep because of this, even at home. I vividly remember tossing and turning that first night in the hotel for a long time, before lying on my back and trying to calm myself down. I then felt the bed sink a little next to my feet. I heard the creak of the old mattress. Someone was sitting at the foot of my bed. My heart was honestly pounding. I hadn't heard my sister or parents get up, so I was terrified. Whatever was sitting there quickly moved so it was sitting on my feet. I felt the weight of whatever it was. I heard the mattress creak again. My feet were freezing cold. It then moved off my feet, and settled down next to them again. The old mattress shifted and creaked again. Within a second or two, I felt the coldest I've ever felt, but not throughout my whole body. The coldness was slowly rising up from my feet, accompanied by a feeling of pressure. I was too scared to open my eyes. I was willing myself to call for my mum, but I was so scared that I just couldn't at first. When I managed to shout out and wake the rest of my family, the cold, pressured feeling had reached up to my knees. When the lights were switched on, the feeling vanished. I have no explanation for this whole situation. My dad slept in that bed the next night, and I stayed awake the whole night in the double with my mum. I posted this in a thread a while ago but gonna do it again because it applies here. When I was in high school my uncle would throw me a couple bucks to help babysit his kids with my aunt. They lived in a 2-story house by the water. Nice area. The kids were about 3 and 6. One day I was sitting in their den on my phone when I started to hear a baby crying. Thinking it was the 3-year-old, I headed to the bottom of the stairs to check and see if my aunt was up there dealing with it. I called for her a couple times with no response. The baby kept crying. I called for her one more time, and when I got no response I started walking up the stairs. Then I heard my cousins and aunt playing outside. All the hairs on my body stood up and I literally felt a chill run down my spine. I quietly turned around, walked down the stairs, got in my car and drove away. The baby was still crying when I closed the door behind me. A few years later I was drunk at a family party and told my uncle the story. He told me that he and his wife used to hear the baby too, and apparently the previous owners had a kid die of SIDS in that room upstairs. He's uber Catholic and had a mass said for the baby. He said after that it never happened again. Still gives me the willies when I talk about it though. I like how you just noped out of there when you were supposed to be babysitting. He's seen enough horror movies to just head out when that shit goes down. Jeez, that's really sad and scary. I came home from work one day to grab my spare tires. My sister was away at school 7 hours away and neither of my parents were going to be home for another 5 hours at minimum. I ran in, changed my clothes, grabbed my tires then drove to a garage to get them installed. I got home 2 hours later and as I walked into the living room, there was a chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway and was facing the front door. I thought nothing of it but didn't recognize the chair as being one that we owned. It was a standard metal folding chair that you would buy for a couple bucks at a retail store. I folded it up and propped it up against my dad's workbench in our garage. My mom gets home a couple hours later and I ask her in passing why she left a metal chair in the middle of the hallway. She tells me we don't own any metal chairs and that she hadn't been home up until an hour ago. I told her I came home and there was a metal chair just sitting in the middle of the hallway after I had gotten back from the garage. She told me to show her the chair and when I went out to the garage to show it to her, it was gone. I looked high and low for that metal chair but couldn't find it. I swore to her that I wasn't on drugs and that I wasn't imagining things. She thought what I was telling her was strange but didn't pay much attention to it. I never saw that chair again, nor do I know where it came from or where it went. Removed. If you search AskReddit for stories about hair-raising freaky things happening, guarantee every single thread has multiple incidences of haunted Furbies starting chanting after years on the back of a shelf, in a cabinet, in a toy box. It's this ridiculous design feature that makes people think they are possessed. I will fight the product developer responsible for this if I ever meet them. I'm sure this will get buried, but I've got one. It's more bittersweet spooky than spooky, but here goes. My ex had this lamp that she had on the island in our kitchen. She turned it on pretty much every night, and in the mornings to make coffee. It was a pretty solid little lamp. I brought my cat to life with us late in our relationship because she had dogs and my cat was pretty up there in age and not used to dogs. So I tried to spare her little heart from that shock. She came to love laying down in the spot by where that lamp plugged into an outlet on the wall of the island. She died soon after I brought her over, and I was absolutely heartbroken. I had a hard time accepting the loss. About a week after my cat died, my ex was grinding coffee in a little electric grinder and I heard her shriek from the other room. I rushed over to see what was going on, and she told me she felt something cold pass by her feet. Then the light on the lamp started flickering. She tried to show me again the flickering, but it didn't happen. I just chalked it up to her being weird at 6 AM. A couple of days later, she asked me to make coffee for her. I grabbed the grinder, flick on the lamp to see what I was doing, and sure enough the same thing happened to me. A cold wind whipped past me like a cat running around my feet. Then the light on the lamp flickered before I could even get the grinder going. It never happened before or after. Despite the hundreds of times I'd use that grinder in the same outlet as a lamp, I like to think it was my little girl saying goodbye one last time. Alt account because this is still a story that I don't want associated with my main account. It's not as spooky as some other stories on here I guess, but Miso and I are still a bit bewildered by it. It's been years and we still wonder about it occasionally. There's no explanation other than some weird supernatural connection or just a really big fucking coincidence. For about 10 years now, my Nana has been living in a nursing home. She had a stroke and mentally she is not all there. She still recognizes us when we visit and gets happy to see us, but she often talks gibberish, thinking she is in a distant memory in the past. It makes me sad because she and I always had a very close connection growing up. My parents both worked a lot and she would stay with me. She used to know when I was lying. She could always sense when I was sick, even when she wasn't over, and she and I are eerily similar both in personality and looks. There are pictures of her when she was 21 and it could be me in the picture. We were very close growing up and I love her dearly. I introduced her to my now husband when we started dating in college. He is from a different country than I am and I live in his country. So we had been dating a few years when my visa was going to expire. In order for us to live in one place, we decided to get married. However, we were still young, fresh out of university and decided to just elope. We decided to get officially married at a courthouse while announcing our engagement and then having a wedding a few years later. Official documents and wedding ceremonies are separated in my husband's country anyways. No one knew of our plan. We were, and are still, stupidly in love and thrilled to have such a crazy secret between us two. In hindsight, it was stupid and no one would have judged us, especially considering we are still happily together years later, but we still decided to hide it because we were stupid kids. So we flew to visit my parents in my home country and announce our engagement, and my dad picked us up from the airport. We were chatting in the car when he tells us that my Nana was freaking out while he visited her the other day, the day we decided to elope. Why was she freaking out? She announced to my whole family that she saw in her dreams that I had eloped and was now married. They dismissed her because they didn't expect that at all. She kept insisting and was incredibly lucid about it. She raised her voice, which she hadn't done since before the stroke. My dad had mentioned because he thought it was sweet that she was so worried about this and became so lucid. My husband and I just got silent in the car and I went cold. We don't know how she knew that or if it was just coincidence, but she knew somehow. We went to visit her a few days later and she didn't remember it at all. She was thrilled we were engaged. We are happily married now and had our wedding and stuff. And no one ever found out we had eloped before the wedding day, except my nana apparently. Sounds like Nana was gifted with dreams. Serious question. What about yourself? These things usually run in the family. My mom always had dreams of things happening and would warn us sometimes about certain people. But one thing that isn't some weird freaky future dream was her always having dreams about someone on a horse, and when she met my dad she finally saw the guy's face and it was dad. I had dreams similar where I was following a guy around. We were always running around town smiling and laughing and having a good time. And I dated before, but when I started dating my current boyfriend suddenly I saw dream guy's face and it was my boyfriend's face. So now I think I'm with the guy of my dreams, which is sweet. My mom had dreams she picked us. She chose my brother and then me, and she had us and we looked like her dream kids she picked. My brother, she got into a bed with him and dad and became a family. Me, it was a cruise ship and people were choosing their daughters and she fought to have me. Then she had a dream where she got a call saying she would have a daughter and she said no. And then she had a miscarriage. That one was sad. She had a dream my brother was going to be poisoned by food by a friend. And the same night I had a dream my brother was choking after eating or drinking something. 2 dreams was too much. My brother stopped hanging out with that kid. And that kid did have some issues later. We were thankful for our dreams. I had a dream my grandpa came to me. He was standing. He lost his legs IRL. And he helped me up and we danced together. He was so happy and free. I woke up to the news he died that night. Dreams are fucking weird. I haven't had dreams like yours, except for that last one. Although, the loved ones in my dreams are already dead. I dream about my mom and dad a lot, who have both recently passed. The first dream I had about my dad, I asked him if he was okay and if everything was alright with him. He said things were good and not to worry and kept laughing because he thought it was so sweet that I was worried about him. I've had this same dream about my grandfather and my uncle, both dead. I always ask if they're okay and want to make sure Beyond is treating them well. They've always said things were great. I hope to have a dream like this with my mom. I've only dreamt about her once, but she's only been gone for almost a year and her death has been, by far, the hardest for me. Maybe visitation dreams are real. I sure hope so because it is so lovely getting to see the people I love again. I have a bunch, but I think the best one I have actually happened to my mom. We lived in a very creepy, very old house when I was little. One day my mom was cleaning my little brother's room while we were at school and every single one of his electronic toys turned on all at once. 2 of them did not have batteries in them. She was so freaked out she had us camp out in the living room for 3 days cause she didn't want my brother alone in his room. Up until we moved, that would occasionally happen. Either 1 or 2 toys at a time. If it's a Furby, there's an explanation when one does it at a time. These things use a weird software-controlled power-off state where they go into an extreme low-power hibernation state when turned off. They're never truly off, just sleeping. When the battery gets to a certain level of charge, the soft power-off gets forgotten or fails and they spontaneously turn on and start talking too. 5, maybe 10 years after they were last used. That freaks a lot of people out. Not applicable if it happened to more than one at a time though. I was seriously expecting you to say it was because Furbies are all possessed by the devil, and frankly I would have just accepted that explanation as common knowledge. Furbies are evil. Dude, I tell this story a lot and no one ever believes me, but I know what I saw. I was staying at my grandparents for the summer when I was 14. It was 11 PM and I was thirsty. Go out to the kitchen and see who I thought was my granddad sitting at the table eating a sandwich. I say hello, grab a glass of water and head back to my room. My grandfather comes out of his room and asks who I was talking to. I turn around and no one was there. It freaked me out, still does to this day. Dad humor is usually stupid, but funny enough in its own way. Grandpa humor is morbid AF because they're at death's door every day. Hilarious prank to pull on someone though. Are they fucking with me? Okay, so this was probably 15ish years ago now. When I was in high school, my group of friends used to spend a lot of time at a particular friend's house because it was huge. It was also quite an old house, but his parents were cool with us basically taking over when we were there. We'd make dinner for about 10 people, stay up late listening to music and playing video games, and they never minded. Anyway, one evening we're all sitting in his room, watching TV. It's dark and the lights are on but the curtains are open. Suddenly two different people on opposite sides of the room jump like they've been startled and look around. Both of them explain they saw in the reflection in the window, on the second floor. Just for your information, somebody walked across the room. None of us had moved. It freaked a few of the girls out and we had to calm them down a bit. Flashed a couple of weeks later, and we found a pack of cards in our friend's house that had letters on them. Somebody suggested we could use these as a Ouija board and figure out if our friend's house was actually haunted. We got a big wooden board. I think it might have been the top of a table once upon a time. Arranged the cards in a circle around the edge with an extra 2 homemade yes/no cards. Got a glass and off we went. It started to answer questions, telling us it was a man who used to live in the house and who died there. We asked when he died and just got the answer long. We asked if he was moving the glass, and he said yes. This is where I decided to be dumb, and I asked if he could move anything else other than the glass. Yes. We all paused and listened for the sound of something moving, but nothing happened. We asked if he had moved something. Yes. Nothing happened again, so we moved on and asked some more questions. This was at 10:30 p.m. After a while longer we said goodbye. I think at least one of us was aware enough about Ouija board lore to know we had to close the conversation properly, and then a little later we all went home. A little spooked but enjoying it nevertheless. I walked home with another friend who lived nearby. As I walked in my front door, my mum called through to me to be careful in my room because a mirror had fallen off the wall earlier and they weren't sure if they'd picked up all the bits of glass. When I asked when this had happened, she told me about 10:30. The same time I asked the spirit to move something. I did not sleep well that night. About 2 months after my father passed, my mom and all of my brothers and sisters were sitting around the dining room table. We were just talking about the past and sharing stories. We were talking about my father and suddenly the globe around the light on the ceiling fell straight down on the center of the table. It didn't break or move at all after hitting the table. Scared the shit out of all of us. Removed. My father passed away almost 11 years ago, but I've seen him 3 times since. The first time was in middle school. I was working on a family tree project and was asking my mother about his side of the family. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw him walk out of the room he died in, heading towards his favorite spot on the couch. The second time was a year or two later. I'd had an awful day, one of the worst in memory, and as I was walking across the hall to the bathroom I caught a glimpse of him sitting at his old spot at the table, reading a newspaper. The last time was the most clear. My senior year of high school, my mother and I were sitting at that same table, talking about college plans. I mentioned I was applying to the rival school of my father's alma mater. Just then, I saw him walk, again from the room he died in, over to the counter, where he grabbed a coffee cup and walked towards his bedroom. I guess they just like to check up with us every now and then. Edit. If this sounds familiar, I've talked about it before. I've posted this before, but it's a great one. I have a tell. This is my parents' story, but it is so good the internet needs it. Sorry for the extreme length. This is like a 2-hour story when my parents tell it. They remember it even more vividly than I could type about it. This is 100% real. If you think otherwise, bugger off. Part 1. Meekwon. Back in the 80s, my parents had just gotten married, graduated from college, and had my big brother. They moved into a small house in a very affluent neighborhood north of Milwaukee. The house was surprisingly in their budget again. Just graduated from college and med school with a little one, but was the smallest on the block. My parents made an offer that was a few under the asking price. 2 other couples offered more than the asking. Bidding war. However, the old man that owned the house rejected both of those offers and said he wanted my folks to have it. He said he and his late wife would have both agreed it was the right thing to do. My folks are super grateful and are extremely excited to be living in the neighborhood. There are many youngsters, so my brother had lots of playtime. Life was very good. Then, shit starts going down. Part 2. Red light. The first thing was with the basement. So, during this time my mom stayed at home with my brother and my dad was getting his practice started. He worked super late and was only home on Sundays basically. My mom did laundry in the basement and one day when she was walking upstairs, a red light at the bottom of the stairs turned on. Now I am told this is a super bright light, and the switch for it was taken out long ago. It is almost like a fallout shelter emergency light with a cage on it. My mom didn't know what to think, so she starts going downstairs to investigate. The light turns off. She figures that maybe it was some sort of surge. The next day, she goes downstairs again. Comes up. The light is on again. Again starts walking down and it turns off. She does not shrug it off this time. She waits a bit at the bottom of the stairs and then walks back upstairs. The light turns on and she runs down this time to catch it. Only this time, it starts flashing like a strobe light before she can even reach the bottom. She noped the fuck out the house so quickly with my brother and didn't go back the rest of the day. The light never turned on for my dad or turned on again after that day. Part 3. Knock knock. After the red light thing, my mom is naturally shook up. She is scared to go downstairs without my dad, rightfully so. But there was something that started before the red light but escalated after. Knocking. My parents figured this was originally just natural sounds of the house as it was fairly old. It would be very sporadic and very infrequent, until one night, my parents were in bed chatting about the day, bills, etc, etc. Then they started hearing knocking. It started in their room under the bed, then on the walls and ceiling. It would be about 30 seconds apart and they could not find a source. Then it sounded like the knocking was outside their room. So, they got up and tried following the sound and find where it was. They went all over the house trying to figure out where it came from. Every time they thought they found the source, it would jump to a different side of the room. They eventually were in the foyer living room and tracked the knocking super frequently and super loud to the foyer closet. My mom had a fireplace poker in hand, and my dad a bat. He crept towards the closet and as he reached for the doorknobs, a voice calls out to them, "Knock knock." He swung the doors open. There was nothing there, and all the knocking stopped. My parents could do nothing but stare at each other. Neither of them slept that night. Part 4. It pushed me. After the red light and knock knock, my parents are wary of this house. My mom is on the verge of a breakdown and not dealing with this well at all. Remember, she is in this house all day with this nonsense. My dad is usually more skeptical towards this kind of stuff, but he knows something is very wrong and thinks my mom is totally justified in her feelings. Well, we fast forward a few weeks, maybe even a month. It is a normal night like any other. My parents are asleep in their room, my brother in his. In the middle of the night, my mom suspects 2 to 3 a.m. can't be certain, being all drowsy. My parents wake up to a huge thud. Immediately my parents jump up and hear my brother is awake calling for them. They rush into his room and he is laying down in the very center of the room on the floor with his blanket perfectly taut and draped on him, as though he was tucked into bed, but on the ground at least 5 feet from his bed. My parents pick him up and ask him what happened. He responds pointing to the closet, "It pushed me. The fox pushed me." My dad opens the closet, rifles through everything looking for an animal, and of course finds nothing. So this is weird, right? Why would a 3-year-old say such a thing? Well, in this moment, my parents remember the last name of the old man that sold them the house, Fox. Part 5. Reconciliation. I shit you not, my parents freaked out on this. There were too many things going on. My mom refused to let herself and my brother stay in the house, especially since she was now pregnant with my sister. My dad decided he was going to take care of this. Again, he is not a superstitious man. He is a doctor and a man of logic. However, he knew there was something going on with this house. A night or two after the fox incident, my dad sat down in the living room and had a talk with the spirit of the house. He said this: "I don't know if you are real. I do not know if you are Mrs. Fox, but I do know this. You are going to stop. We are a peaceful and loving family. If you are Mrs. Fox, your husband would be ashamed of you. He wanted us to have our family here because he knew you would want us to. Just as you raised your family here, I want to do the same. You may stay here as long as you like, but you cannot do this to us anymore. I am sorry for your passing and for your pain, but you cannot take it out on us. My wife is pregnant, and you are causing her loads of stress. You even went after my son. This will stop, or I will seek out someone who will make it stop. Thank you. Good night." After this, nothing bad happened to my family again. There were no lights, knocks, or foxes. But, and this is the craziest thing ever, there was one final thing. In a wooden cabinet that my mom bought at a neighborhood garage sale a few days after they moved into the house, there was a card, an anniversary card. It said, Happy anniversary and Fox. This was found 2 days after my parents' anniversary in June after they moved the cabinet to the other side of the room. They had owned the cabinet since they moved into the house and had not seen the old man since they bought the house either. My parents have moved many times over the years and lost the card inevitably. We still have the cabinet. It sits in our cabin to this day. The end. I removed my parents' names because you are on Reddit and I don't trust all of you. I forgot something from part 4. My brother was in the middle of the room put to bed on the floor. Well, after all the dust had settled my parents started renovating. They wanted to put carpet in my brother's room. So they tore up the tile fake flooring stuff. And to quote my dad, right where your effing brother was laying on the Fox night, there was a bloodstain. Mrs. Fox had died in the house, in my brother's room. She was very ill, but fell while trying to replace a light in the room. I had saved some spooky stuff. Here is one of them. Not my story though. Link, Reddit webpage. Older thread, Reddit webpage. You minor messnet chase. Story, Reddit webpage. I had just finished my initial military training. Basic, 8, a few other classes, and got sent to my first duty station. My unit was at NTC for pre-deployment training, so I met up with the rear echelon. I get issued my room and spent 3 very disturbed days nights in the barracks with weird stuff happening like gear not where I left it, locked drawers being opened, the microwave turning on by itself, shit like that. My roommate who I knew throughout training showed up on the 4th day and I told him something along the lines of, "Watch your shit. Someone's been fucking with my stuff and I don't know who." So the 4th night comes around and myself and my roommate secure our room and gear and go to bed. Gotta be up at 0530 for PT, so it's an early night. We lock all our stuff and go to bed. I woke up around 100 cause my blanket had fallen to the ground and I was cold, which was weird cause we were in the south in summer so it's always hot. I hop down to get my blanket and I notice my armor is open, so I open the lock, close it, lock it, and get back to bed. I fell back asleep pretty easy, but I woke up again at about 0230 and all my stuff and my roommate's stuff is thrown around the room. I wake up my roommate and he's pissed cause someone is fucking with us and can't figure out who it is. We clean it up, lock our stuff and go back to bed. I woke up a third time at 0337 and we're not alone. I can hear my roommate snoring, so I know it's not him. I sat up and saw someone in the little kitchenette area with the fridge open looking in it. I was freezing again. I was about to say something as the soldier turned around. My eyes had a moment to adjust to the bright light and then I started recognizing gear like the L-shaped flashlight on his shoulder, his Alice pack with magazine holders and canteens, boots and fatigues. This dude was combat ready. As my eyes reached his face he turned a bit and I could see it. Half his head and helmet were gone. Blown off by the looks of it. I'm scared shitless at this point. He closed the fridge, walked across the room keeping his bright green eyes on, opened my front door and walked out. As he exited he turned back around and said to me, "Be safe." I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I didn't wake my roommate up. I just sat up in bed for about 2 hours till I had to get ready for part 0630 rolls around, so everyone is outside the barracks in formation getting ready to start PT and the acting first sergeant says, "Hey, not Chase. You good? Looks like you seen a ghost." I replied with, "Negative. I'm fine. 1SG good to go." About halfway through PT he comes up to me and asks me what's wrong because I'm visibly shaken up. I told him I was fine, just couldn't sleep last night. A few others asked if I was okay and I just lied and said I was fine. I really wasn't and they could see that, but they let me be. After PT ended, the acting 1SG pulled me to the side and told me to speak freely, openly, and with all confidentiality and off the record. What is wrong? I told him that if I told him what happened he would think I'm batshit crazy. He assured me it was off record and once again said, "Talk to me. You seriously look like you've seen a ghost." That got an awkward chuckle out of me and I began to tell him my story, and when I got to the part about his head the acting 1SG lost his shit. "Who the fuck put you up to this? This is not funny etc etc." He smoked me for about 30 minutes, made me do push-ups, mountain climbers, stuff like that, all while yelling at me that I'm a piece of shit. Finally, after about 30 minutes of that, he says, "Look at me in the eye and swear on everything that you love that you're not lying to me." I told him I was not lying. It fucking happened. So he says follow me, so I do. We get to the command office, which I had never been in, and they were obviously locked. He takes me behind 3 locked doors in 3 rooms I had never stepped foot in, and when he opened the last door I saw it. It gave me chills. It still gives me chills. But plain as day there's the soldier's portrait behind the commander's desk. I froze and said, that's him. Acting 1SG. The guy who assigned me that room told me who it was. He was a corporal in the unit on my unit's first deployment to Iraq, and he died in an IED attack that took off part of his head. I was the first soldier to be assigned that room since it belonged to the deceased corporal. He forgave me and I forgave him, and he told me some stories about who this guy was. I deployed with that unit just a couple months later and spent 12 months fighting in that shithole. I nearly died I don't know how many times. My vehicle got hit with IEDs and rockets, and it always made me think of that corporal. I survived more things than most people can imagine. I always felt like that corporal was keeping an eye out for me. Not everyone in my unit was as lucky as me. 3 from my company didn't get to come home. Wow, that made me real sad. Thanks for saving it and sharing. I've posted in the past a story about some weird thing I saw in the woods at my grandparents' house. TLDR. Silhouette of a deer against the curtain suddenly changed into a man's silhouette. Usual suggestions: ask in Walker or Wendigo. The one I liked was maybe it was just Pan joking around. But I'm gonna post about another instance of weird shit. This was at the house we lived in for about 7 years. Many strange things happened in that house. You could hear voices murmuring from time to time. I saw a shadow person. Saw someone stick their head into the room once. None of it felt hostile, but the same couldn't be said for this pervasive feeling my mother and I both felt if we went out front at night. She and I both felt like there was something watching, and it wasn't friendly. On this particular night, it was about midnight or so, and I felt like driving to the 24/7 grocery store since I wanted some snacks. As I stepped out the front door, I saw something out of the corner of my eye, and turned to look. There was this very tall thing just floating. For lack of a better term, I'd almost describe it as hanging, but there was nothing holding it up. Outside of my brother's window, it was seemingly covered in a sheet that had once been white, but was extremely dirty, so it was more off-white, and got brown with mud and dirt the further down it went. There were no visible feet, nor eyes or face, but I could tell it was staring at my brother's window. As I stared at it, it turned to look at me, and I remember feeling like one of those butterfly specimens. Pinto board. It was as though its stare was physically holding me in place. It felt like an eternity, but only a second or two passed, and it looked back at the window, the pressure lifting, and then vanished. Right as it vanished, there was a fluttering of wings in the tree above, and one of our neighborhood's owls came to perch there. In a way it felt like the owl came to my defense, as silly as that may sound. Our cul-de-sac loved a pair of owls. They were more like neighbors to us, so maybe it was just protective of a fellow neighbor. That's how I like to think of it. Anyway, in any event, I decided that it might be best to just make some popcorn or something that night instead. Come to think of it, I don't think I ever told my brother about the thing. I probably should. Removed. About 5 years and 2 boyfriends ago, I moved into an old farmhouse with my then significant other. He was a hoarder and was embarrassed about the state his house was in after his wife left him. He had an RV, and that's where he slept, because there was just shit, garbage, clothes, boxes, up to your knees in every room of the house. Me, being extremely distressed by clutter, cleaned that house, down to cobwebby corners of the ceiling. It took me weeks, but I Murphy's oiled every inch of wood, filled his truck with over 10 loads of garbage. The very first night I was there, things were weird. At that point I had only cleared part of the living room. The boyfriend snored unbearably loud, so I opted to sleep inside, on the couch, while he slept out in his camper. I had just had a fight with my mother and was lying awake around 4 AM fuming about it. I heard my boyfriend come in the back door, muttering to himself as usual. He was opening and closing drawers and cabinets in the kitchen. Figured he was searching for something. Finally I got up because hell, I was already awake. Maybe I could help him find whatever it was. The kitchen was 5 feet from where I was, and when I walked in, there was no one there. I looked around and called for him, but he wasn't there. I don't get scared easily, and at this point I was just curious about where he was. I went out the camper and could hear him snoring hard before I even got to the door. I shook him awake and asked him gently what he had needed in the house. He said he hadn't left the camper all night. I thought, he was sleepwalking. When I went back inside, though, I noticed it had snowed lightly in the night and the only tracks leading up to the camper were mine. Couple days later, I moved my two cats in. They are super on edge, a lot of growling, acting out of character, especially in the middle of the night. I completely dismissed that as it was a new, unfamiliar place. Obviously they were uncomfortable. I had finally gotten the bedroom habitable and they would not cross the threshold into it. The first night we slept in the bedroom was when I started to fear the house. The bed was up against a window that faced out to the cornfield and my guy insisted on sleeping on the outside of the bed, leaving me pressed against the window. I got this horrible feeling. Something was right outside the window and I was frantic to the point of tears. I kept telling him there was something out there and he said I was being dramatic, which was stupid, because I'm just not. You spend your whole life being logical and calm, and when something weird happens, no one believes you. I slept on the couch. The next day, I noticed a handprint on the top of the bedroom window that I had just cleaned the day prior. I held my hand up to it and it was thrice the size of my own hand, bigger than any person's handprint I've ever seen. It wasn't just a print, though. It was elongated, as if the hand had dragged down the window. Still could be an explanation, even though I had cleaned that window the day before and would have noticed, except the print was over 9 feet off the ground directly over an open coal cellar. I showed my boyfriend and he told me something surprising. His ex-wife thought there was something wrong with the house too. She was making dinner one day and he had gotten home from work. Her back was turned to him and they had a full conversation. Then she looked out the kitchen window and saw him pull up in his truck. He still blew it off with me, just telling me I was paranoid and such. All this time, I assumed he was right, dismissed my instincts and went about things normally. Then one morning in the spring I got up to use the bathroom. It was 4:46 in the morning and I knew the time because I checked my phone when I got up. The whole bedroom was light from the sunrise and I quietly climbed back into bed. The house is all wood paneling and because of my arachnophobia I had the bed scooted about 5 inches away from the wall where our heads were. I laid down and tucked my arm up under the pillow with my hand over the edge. The second I closed my eyes, an icy cold hand grabbed me by the wrist and yanked down hard. I bolted up and in a state of complete terror shook my boyfriend awake and asked if he was fucking with me. He wasn't. I will never forget that grip because I had to struggle to get my hand back. I called my close friend and she said, you know that there's a cemetery within view of your bedroom, right? I had forgotten, but being a practical person it had never occurred to me that there might be a connection. She said let's try something. Came over with a sagebrush and we smudged the house. We were both laughing at ourselves as we did it. But the thing is, nothing weird happened after that. Well, except me falling into a hole in the floor. But I blame that on my own clumsiness. The relationship withered. I moved out, but we remain friends. He says nothing strange has happened since I left. The handprint is fucking me up. I currently live in a haunted house. I've heard voices, footsteps, lights have been turned on off. One of the ghosts has a thing for silverware. I hear it clattering in the drawer all the time. And sometimes a knife or two will end up in the wrong slot in the drawer. But the strangest, scariest experience I had was the first night I spent in the house. I wasn't finished moving in. There were boxes everywhere. I didn't even have my mattress up there yet. I was bedding on an old futon mattress, watching a video on my phone, when I get the pins and needles feeling of my feet falling asleep, except it wasn't on my feet. It was on the top of my head in the shape of a hand. I said, good night, turned off my light and tried to sleep. When I woke up my closet door was ajar, but other than that everything was otherwise untouched. I guess whoever my unseen roommate is, just wanted to check out who I was on my first night. You should get him his own fork, knife and spoon for Christmas to do whatever with, haha. Is it an older home? Always the possibility of bad ventilation leading to slight carbon monoxide poisoning which can cause confusion hearing or seeing stuff that isn't there etc. Toxic mold is also a possibility. It can cause confusion and mild hallucinations. Or get out of here with all of your dangerous explanations. No fun party poopers. I feel like a carbon monoxide detector should be stickies at the top of these threads. Maybe there is such a thing as ghosts, but there is definitely such a thing as carbon monoxide poisoning, and even just ruling that out is a big deal. Scientist here. Look for big fans or old pipes that could produce infrasound. This is sound too low for your ears to detect, but it can fuck with physical objects and even make you see things by deforming the shape of your eyes if it happens to resonate with them, or hear things if it resonates in your ear in such a way to stimulate your cochlear neurons. There are even reported cases of ears and noses spontaneously bleeding from the effect. Pyronogen webpage. Appliances, especially those with big bulky fans, are usually the culprits. Use an app like this one, Spectrum Analyzer. Apps on Google Play webpage. To look for sources in that low range, literally walk around your house with your phone and see where those frequencies peak. Vic Tandy and Tony Lawrence of the psychology department wrote a paper called Ghosts in the Machine. Richard Wiseman webpage. For the Journal of the Society for Psychical Research, they cited infrasound as the cause of apparitions seen by staff at a so-called haunted laboratory in Warwick. It happened some years ago when he was designing anesthetic machines in that haunted Warwick laboratory. A cleaner had already given in her notice, complaining that she had seen a grey object out of the corner of her eye and gone all cold. Tandy was working late one night when the grey thing came for him. I felt the hairs rise on the back of my neck, he recalls. It seemed to be between me and the door, so the only thing I could do was turn and face it. It disappeared, but only to reappear in a different form the following day when Tandy, a keen fencer, was oiling his foil and changing its grip for a forthcoming tournament. The handle was clamped in a vise on a workbench, yet the blade started vibrating like mad. He remembers. This time it was daylight. There were other people around. Although the hairs were rising once again, he was determined to find a scientific explanation. Why did the blade vibrate in one part of room and not another? Because, as it turned out, infrasound was coming from a fairly new extractor fan. When we finally switched it off, it was as if a huge weight was lifted, he says. It makes me think that one of the applications of this ongoing research could be a link between infrasound and sick building syndrome. Sound familiar? Vibrating objects, strange sounds and sensations. General Red, give infrasound investigation a try. You could bust the ghost in your own house. I find it really nice that you told it good night. Have you ever messed up all the silverware in the drawer to see whether the ghost would enjoy sorting it? The way I see it, they're live here too, so I'm giving them a courtesy. I haven't tried that, but might have to the next time they start being active. The door being ajar made me think of this horror comic, The Door in the Kitchen. The Door in the Kitchen webpage. My high school used to be a giant mansion before it was converted into an orphanage and then a high school. One section of the school, the third floor, was inaccessible. The staircase which led to the floor was blocked off with wood and painted black to match the chorus room where it was located. In 2003, during the fall school show of Lemurs, they had to remove the wood so they could replace the windows on that third floor. We even ended up using some of the removed windows for our barricade. We had play practice most nights, and if you lived far enough away, usually you would just stay at the school and wait rather than go home just to come right back up. While waiting for practice to start one night, myself and 3 friends, Ryan, Mike and Michelle, decided to go up the staircase to check out the third floor. The staircase was rotted and falling apart from years of disuse, so we carefully went up one at a time to find an unremarkable hallway with some even less remarkable rooms off to the sides. All of this led into a big open area with old, stacked desks and folders full of test papers from like the 80s or something. The 4 of us were a bit disappointed because the rumor was that this section of the school was not converted from the orphanage that occupied the space several decades earlier, and the ghosts of orphans still haunted the place. Since we didn't get spooked, we ended up just digging through the old papers. While Michelle was looking through the papers in a side room with her back to us, Ryan pushed Mike and myself out of the room quietly and into an adjacent room to scare Michelle into thinking we disappeared. Sure enough, she comes bolting out of the room screaming at us, throwing out "fuck you guys" and "this isn't funny." We had to muffle our mouths to keep from laughing. When, all of a sudden, one of the people in the room fucking ruined the whole thing by giggling like a little girl. I turned to Ryan and Mike to see which one of them ruined the joke, but both of their hands were over their mouths and their eyes were wide as dinner plates. This room we were in, hiding behind the door, was small, maybe the side of a small, one-stall bathroom, maybe that's what it was once upon a time. And somebody in this goddamn tiny room was giggling and it was none of us. This whole plot played out in probably like 10 seconds between leaving Michelle and hearing the giggle. So we stood there staring at each other waiting for something to happen that explained this. It was like 4 or 5 p.m. and we were the only ones in the chorus classroom the entire day. We would have seen someone go upstairs. We would have heard the stairs creaking as they went up there. Whoever giggled at us from inside that room was up there already. Unfortunately, we didn't get the explanation we needed because a second set of giggles started happening. This time more than one person making them. That was it for Ian. A big, tough former athlete turned show kid, who screamed the highest pitch scream I've ever seen a guy that size make. It would have been funny if we weren't terrified. He pushed past us, ran screaming out into the hallway, scared the daylights out of Michelle on his way down, and we bolted down the steps. This time, we did not take them one by one and actual chunks of rotted wood started falling off. We explained what happened to Michelle and then went somewhere that was not the Chris classroom until play practice started. The maintenance team must have known we were up because we all collectively got a talking to about going up there. Safety concerns with the rotted steps. So of course, people started going up there willy-nilly hoping to see a ghost. There are more stories about that third floor during that year that promptly stopped once they replaced the windows and sealed the room back up. Now the school is closed and empty, so whatever ghosts were having a good time are now free to do so without the living getting in the way. Edit. Sorry, this is much longer than it seemed when I posted TLDR. Ghost orphans at my high school think pranks are funny. When my daughter was 7, she kept asking me why I was smoking in her room late at night. I was a smoker at the time, but I never smoked in her room. I never smoked upstairs at all. I told her that I sure wasn't smoking in her room late at night or at any time, but she was insistent that someone was coming in, sitting on her bed and smoking. I was kind of freaked out, but I knew nobody was sneaking into our house just to catch a late night smoke in my daughter's bedroom. The house had belonged to the in-laws of my daughter's teacher at the time. So, her teacher asked her how she liked the new house and her new room, and of course, my kid says it's great. But someone smokes in my room at night and mom swears it not her. So, on parent conference night, the teacher pulls me aside and asks which bedroom our daughter sleeps in. I tell her and she says, I don't know what you believe and I don't want to offend you, but kid says someone is sitting on her bed and she smells cigarette smoke late at night. I'm getting ready for a deserved lecture on smoking around children, which I did not get. The teacher went on to tell me that her mother-in-law wasn't allowed to smoke due to health issues and that she would sneak into what was now my daughter's room at night for a few quick drags. My daughter's bed was in the middle of her favorite clandestine smoking spot. We actually lived in harmony with Hazel the ghost for quite some time. She had an annoying habit of putting things back where she thought they belonged, but otherwise, she was a fine ghost. She had said in life that she had no intentions of leaving her house even after death. I did end up having a chat with her about her chosen smoking spot though, and that stopped pretty quickly. I lived next to a facility for developmentally handicapped people for 3 years. Every day I would jog past this historical marker on their property. One day I decided to take a break. I love history, so I finally walked over and read it. It was a dedication to a mass grave of 300 people for what used to be the grounds for a hospital for the insane. I nearly shat my tracksuit. It was a dedication to a mass grave of 300 people for what used to be the grounds for a hospital for the insane. Wait. So, what? Did this facility not actually exist for the 3 years you jogged by it? I think it's that the facility was repurposed from built on the grounds of an insane asylum. Freshman year at my university, we had a creepy, old dorm on campus that no one was living in. Everyone generally avoided it because it just had an uncomfortable feeling when you got close to it and felt like you were being watched. There are rumored stories about it of 2 women dying there on separate occasions. 1 murder, 1 suicide, and they are the ones who haunt the building. One night, a friend was in a bad mood because his girlfriend had broken up with him. So I was walking around campus with him to let him get it off his chest and just trying to help him feel better. We walked past the dorm and I brought it up about it being haunted and was telling him the stories to try and take his mind off it. So, the way the bottom floor was set up, There were 2 doors on both sides of the building and the hallway ran the entire length of the building and you could see the other door. We walked up to one of the windows and were just looking down the hall when 2 girls walked out of the room, wearing clothes that looked like they were from the 70s 80s and stood there in the hall looking at each other, not speaking. Then, one girl slowly turned her head and looked straight at us, slowly turned her head back, then turned and walked the opposite way from us down the hall. So we ran to the other side of the building, but we couldn't find them. We came back to the original door, and watched them do the same thing all over again. We looked at each other and ran. This freaked me out for a while, especially after, when I was sleeping in my room and all my posters fell off the wall at the same time. After telling this story to another friend, he convinced me to go back with him and try to find a way in. We found an open window, which we later found out was the room the girl hung herself in, and climbed in and started walking down the hall. We wandered around the building a bit and just started to notice generally creepy things. Water faucets started coming on. We'd walk through one room and then back through and a chair would be moved. On the first floor, a desk was turned upside down under the stairwell. As we were getting close to leaving, a lot more water faucets came on and kept getting louder and louder. Then when we got back to the room to go back out of the window, and as we put our hands on the window, the door slammed closed. So we ripped the door open, dove out and ran back to our dorm, and never went back. Your friend must be highly persuasive to convince you to actually walk into that place, because I'd be damned if I ever looked at that place again, let alone walked into it. It took a long time for him to convince me, like, literally badgered me for months before I finally relented just so he'd shut up. I at least got a great story from it. I always ask myself, if this was a horror movie, what would they do, and I don't do whatever that would be. You did exactly that. But cool fucking story. True, if it was a movie, I'd be the token white idiot who always wonders what the noise is and walks towards it. My daughter lived in an old dorm with no elevator. She was in the stairwell one night, climbing up to her room 3rd floor. If I recall, she heard someone behind her, also climbing the stairs. She says she definitely heard footsteps and just assumed someone was close behind her. She didn't really think much about it, but when she got to her floor and opened the door to the hall, she turned around and the stairwell was empty. Footsteps, whispers, and other spooky things were pretty common at Dexter Hall. Mine is a bit different. Me and friend of mine live in rural Ireland. We were going for a walk in the grounds behind the castle. As we were coming to the end of our walk, it was pretty dark and we glanced into an area that has a well and something caught our eyes. He stayed a bit further back, walked over and looked into the well only to see 2 yellow eyes looking up at me and a sinister looking grin from a girl with dark hair. Naturally we ran like little girls. We were followed by this little girl all night. We went to graveyard and found her watching us while she sat on a tree. We went under a bridge a few miles outside of the village and she was standing at the other end of the bridge, and slowly started walking toward us. We both saw her every single time. Explanation is easy. We dropped a shitload of LSD and were hallucinating. Just fascinating that we both saw the exact same thing. I never told him what I saw in the well until he told me what he had seen. It matched. Jesus Christ, on acid? I would not be handing that experience well at all. Seriously, I would straight shit myself, I think. I've never heard of acid causing the same hallucinations between people. Is this true that acid does this? No, acid won't give 2 people the same hallucinations at the same time, unless they are talking about it at the time. Even then it's unusual for the hallucinations to be the exact same. Is it possible that they saw the same, but completely innocent thing that triggered a similar hallucination? Say they were in a graveyard where there was a statue of a woman and there happened to be a stray cat around, glowing eyes. Combined, that could trigger a similar hallucination, especially if one person is reacting to the other's actions. One could simply forget they said she's following us or something similar that relates to his specific image and that moves the other's hallucination to become similar. Yup, you got it. When people trip together, it's not awful hard for them to have similar hallucinations. Just by seeing the same thing and a few comments, it's hard for them to see the exact same thing under these circumstances. Similar, sure. Exact, not likely. To this day I don't know if I was dreaming or not, but I clearly heard someone gently knocking on my bedroom door in the middle of the night. I live alone. Just yesterday I was in my cousin's house after helping them with the laundry and heard someone say hello in a "is anyone here" low tone, and the family was in their parents' room and I was in their room. I was like, oh, and decided must be the TV that was on in their room, and if anything they would have heard it too. Dog started barking a little bit. Then after like 10 minutes I stopped paying attention cause no one was screaming there was an intruder in the house. Cousin comes back to their room and asks me why is the front door open? Well fuck. WTF. If anything, this sounds more like an actual intruder than something supernatural like most of the other posts. Buddy of mine accidentally hit the garage door button at my house in the middle of the night, while I was having a major argument with my partner. Normally this wouldn't be a big deal, but there's a ton of crap in my garage from former roommates, and the door won't go back down without a ton of rearranging shit. So he goes about helping me rearrange shit and he's on the outside of the garage, looking at moving something, when all of a sudden he jumps backwards and goes, "What the fuck?" I ask him what's up and he says he saw a girl run through the garage from a side no one could have gotten to without us seeing or noticing they were there to begin with, to the other side but not out the garage door connected to the house. Just kind of phased through a wall. Garage is inhabited regularly as a smoking room. Nowhere for anyone to be. We know for sure no one is squatting it. Buddy says it didn't look like any girl he knew, and the physics were just all wrong. There was too much stuff in the way for her to have run the way he said she did. Like she just phased through objects and disappeared. My house has never been, nor does it now, feel haunted. That particular buddy and I lived in a very haunted house once. Fear and loathing, but mostly fear, in the Poconos, not a LEP web page, so we both know what that shit feels like, and he had been up a few days on a bender, so he waved it away as a hallucination, even though he hadn't been prone to them during the bender after that incident, nor before. But fuck me if that shit still doesn't creep me right the fuck out thinking about. Let's say, best case scenario, it's a parallel world phasing in 2 hours. A. That can happen. B. What is the fuck was she running from? Just playful hurry, or imminent danger in her reality? Why do I do this shit to myself before bed? In high school my friends and I were messing around with a Ouija board one night. We had done it before and nothing remarkable had ever happened. We usually did it to try and scare each other or our girlfriends. We all thought it was a joke. That night there was no one else home except the 7 of us and we were all together around the board. One of the girls there wanted to try it. She had never done it before. This time was different. The board misspelled some of the words the same way every time. It gave answers that seemed really historically accurate for our town. Things we neither knew or cared about. Long story short, the spirit claimed it was a 10-year-old boy who had died on the property in the 1800s and was buried there too in an unmarked grave. My friend's house was on a farm in the edge of town. We were all a little freaked out because the board had never been so detailed and consistent. However, we were still skeptical and we were all assuming one of us was trying to scare the rest. Finally, my friend asked if the spirit could do something to prove he was there with us. It went to yes and then spelled out KNOCK. Then the planchette stopped moving. We just all stared at it silently and then there was a rap on the window right next to us. The lights were on outside and there was absolutely no one out there. We never touched that effing board again. Sad but ghostly. I found and fostered a cat. She was beautiful. Snowshoe Blue Point Siamese. Basically my dream cat. And so cute. Big round eyes and little round face. I named her Penelope, Pep for short. Sadly the stress of a new kitty was too much for my older cat so I gave Pep to a friend. Couldn't stand to never see her again. But at that point, I'd had her 3 months. But it just wouldn't work. She was so smart. Her favorite trick was high five because she always got a treat. She high-fived all the time wanting treats. So Pep lives with my friend Lisa. Pep had been skinny as hell when I found her, but she was getting healthier. One day I get a text from Lisa. I'm just gonna pretend you didn't know about this. 4 kittens, 2 gray girls, a black boy, and a blue tux boy that looked exactly like her in a different color. I had to keep him. I didn't know if my older cat would accept him but I was going to try. I named him Pepin and he came home at 7 weeks old. All was well. He was exactly like his mother. When I brought him home, he went right for what her favorite toy had been when she had lived with me. He did everything she had done. He slept in her screwy positions. He laid in the cat tree with a paw hanging over like he was driving a two-seater, all just like her. He walked like her, sounded like her. He had her face and her bone structure. If I had ever known what she would do in a situation, I knew what he would do, and I have never to this day been wrong. Pep snuck out a window 3 months later and was killed by a car. Devastated doesn't come close. The next morning, Pepin hops up on my bed and sits there, waits until I pay attention to him. Then very deliberately, like Pep always did, gave me a high five. I never taught him that. He never saw Pep do it. She would only do it for me, not Lisa. There was no way he could have learned it. But yet, there was. The morning after she died, I made it. I'm okay. I'm right here. I'm not religious and occasionally spiritual, but I have a feeling, somehow, that's her, like she knew she didn't have long and repackaged herself. At first I thought I was seeing it because I wanted to. Of course there's a resemblance between mother and offspring. Of course there's similarities. But everything, and he looks exactly like her. If they were the same color they would be indistinguishable. And how did he learn to high five? Considering he's never done it since, and had never done it before. I can't even teach him. He knows other tricks. He can sit, stand up, fetch, roll over, but he won't learn high five. My mom always told me cats always find their way back. They just look a little different each time. So I'm 17 and I was working at my great-grand's house. She's really old, and is called Constance. Hasn't walked in years, just turned 100 years old and spends all day lying in bed. I often go visit her, in this old schoolhouse that she has lived in for around 60 years. It's got an amazing view of the river. From her bedroom you get one of the best views in the whole town. Not that she can see any of it, because she's almost completely blind. She always has these stories about how all the children from the school would play out in her front garden. She's also told me that men had been in her house at night and tortured her, but that's unrelated. Anyways, I'm visiting her one morning and I ask if there's any jobs needing done around her house. She tells me that I should check the garden and do some tidying up around there. So I go out the house and inspect. Now next to her porch, where everyone goes in, is a really narrow pathway. It's just between the house and this embankment. So I look down it. It appears to be a little path leading to nowhere, and notice there's loads of leaves needing cleared. Above the path is just branches and greenery. So I go inside, get a rake, put on gloves and head in. It's only 10 meters, but as I'm going down I notice the path seems to veer behind the house. I follow it round, into this incredibly strange 5x5 footage open space. There appears to be no other way to get to this 5x5 square, but I notice there's this door. It's built into the side of the wall, not a house. It's covered in bracken, Scottish word for ferns, and so I pull some of it back. It appears the door has something written on it, so I clear everything out the way and move back to inspect. There's clearly games room printed into it. Now that made sense to me, because it was a school, right? But then I notice this door has a padlock on it. The padlock seems sturdy, even though the metal it's attached to looks ancient. I try it and it won't budge, but notice there's a little hole in the door. I put my iPhone torch on to try see in, but it's got what appears to be another layer of wood behind it. So I head back. I go up to the room, and asked her about this little room in the back. I show her the photo that I still have, and she doesn't recognize it, probably because she's practically blind. All she says is no. The games room was down under the stairs by the door. There was 2 rooms out back, but they were just storage. I don't remember there ever being a games room out back, so I ask her where these rooms were. She tells me they're up on the embankment, also built into the wall. So I go back out. I climb up, using the side of the house and the wall of the embankment, like some shit out of Spider-Man, and manage to find these 2 wood cellar door type things. So I go over and notice that the locks are incredibly rustic. I could literally just pull them off. So I do. Now my gran was right. It was just an old storage room. I open it up, and it's empty. Some old fabric type material on the ground. That appears to be all. So I ask my grandparents, Constance's daughter. She does not know anything about these rooms, despite growing up in the house, and literally just told me. I ask her to come up and take a look. So she does. We go through the same process, only much longer to climb up. And when we arrive at the doors built into the wall, her only remark was, "Oh, peculiar." Best go and see grandma because we will need to bring you home soon. Still spooks me out thinking about how this tiny little bolted room in the wall is so detached from society. My great-gran didn't remember it existing, and my gran appeared to have no interest. Nobody would see this from anywhere else. This little 5x5 patio thing is there. On the other side of the wall is just a big hill which I assume the room was built into. Above it is completely covered in branches and leaves. If anyone actually reads this and feels like they wanna see pics, I can post them. Here are the pictures. Imgur webpage. And Imgur webpage. And Imgur webpage. And Imgur webpage. Thanks to you biology for free and you not fond of most things. One time I wanted a Coke and when I went into the kitchen there was, I shit you not, a knife balancing on its tip, next to a full can of Coke, when I was home alone. Edit. Holy crud, this has gotten a lot of attention. To answer a few questions, yes, I drank the soda. To the skeptics who say I'm lying, this happened. If you don't believe, give me a rational explanation as to how a soda can get from a refrigerator to the kitchen counter, along with a knife standing on its tip, which might be impossible. Provide me with a rational explanation as to how that happened in a locked house. I like to think that stuff like this is the military testing invisibility suits and just fucking with random people. Removed. 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 Not spooky, but one time I dropped a DVD case down 2 flights of stairs. It tumbled and flipped all the way down and somersaulted off the last step and then stuck the landing at the bottom. Just dead stop standing straight up. I yelled to my 3-year-old, holy shit. If you ever vaguely recall a DVD landing like this, it happened. I got lost in the woods in North Carolina during a game of paintball. It was broad daylight, but the woods were really thick and every tree looked exactly the same. It probably only lasted 1-2 minutes, but it felt like I was screaming help for hours. The worst part, turns out I wasn't even lost. I was maybe 10 feet from everyone else, and they all heard me screaming help, but they thought I was acting as a decoy. Like what the actual fuck? Who hears someone crying for help and ignores them? Jesus, Dad. When I was a kid, we'd be out at dusk helping my parents in the garden and they'd freeze like they just saw something terrifying and say grab your brother and run to the house right now and lock the door behind you. Double quote. So my poor older sister and I would scoop up our kid brother, book it to the house in pure silent fear, and huddle together by the window so we could peep out. Every damn time they'd come in from the field, doubled over laughing. I know they thought it was funny because we bought it every time. But Jesus Christ, Mom and Dad, you want a couple kids with anxiety issues? You're doing it right. I was visiting my parents while I was in college one summer. I was taking a nap around 11 AM on the couch in their living room with the TV on when I was woken up by a doorknob jiggling hard upstairs. Their doors have those knobs that lock by pushing in the knob and turning. No buttons or anything on it. I assumed that my dad had locked himself in a room accidentally, as he had done it before to great comedic effect and frustration on his part. So I go upstairs, and all the doors are wide open. At this point I was a little weirded out, but I decided I was having some weird half-awake imaginary sound thing going on. I go back downstairs and turn the TV off and fall back asleep. About an hour later I'm woken up again by the sound of a doorknob jiggling, except it was on the other side of the house upstairs from the last one. I go up again and all the doors are still wide open. I called my parents at work. They ran an automobile service station at the time, and asked if either of them had been home at all that day, and both said that they were at work all day. Needless to say I got the fuck out of there. It hasn't happened since, and that was about 6 years ago. Also related, a friend and I were helping my parents move into that house, and moving a bunch of stuff into a room above the attached garage. It was a small room that could be a bedroom, study, etc. But because the air and heat didn't work very well in there, they decided to use it as storage. There was a small closet attached to the room, and when my friend and I were moving things into there, we noticed that there was a bookcase sitting in there with a note saying that we could keep it. That's when we noticed that there was the top of a doorway behind the bookcase. Again, super creeped out. Eventually we got around to checking that door out and it just led to the attic and nothing was in there. But at the time it was super creepy and weird. This isn't the crazy ghost story stuff that other folks have posted, but to this day this gives me chills. Early sophomore year in college, my girlfriend spends the night in my dorm room. She'd lost her virginity to me the night before and this was her first time ever spending the night in a boy's bed. That morning, she's still half asleep so I get into the shower. While showering I'm 100% certain I can hear someone calling out my name. But hey, I ignored it. There's that thing where you end up hearing your own name in white noise just BC, it's something you're so attuned to hear. The weird thing was it sounded very loud, like it was being shouted, but also very, very far away, but also like the sound was coming from deep inside my own head, like I was wearing headphones and hearing my own name called out in this tiny, panicked scream. It was really odd, but again I dismissed it entirely, finished my shower and went about my day, never mentioning it to anyone. 2 years later, we are sitting around in someone's dorm room and my girlfriend casually mentions, "Oh yeah, remember that first night I stayed in your room, and then you went to go to the shower?" I was freaking out because it was so dark in your room and I started having a panic attack and started screaming your name in my head while you were in the shower. I try not to think about this too much, since I'm very much one of those science uber Alice types of guys who likes to mock new age crap. But this was the one thing I've personally experienced that feels like it was legit supernatural. No ghosts or angels or any of that bullshit. Just a tiny experience of straight up telepathy. Or one really weird heck of a coincidence. When I was about 12 I was at my cousin's house. He was about 9. Fucking around on their trampoline. This was an older neighborhood, kind of dilapidated. My cousin and I get the bright idea to sneak into the old abandoned house on the other side of his fence. So we climb the fence, walk the narrow path between his fence and the side of the old house. We were barefoot, WTF, and go around to the front of the house. The front door was actually modern, a steel door with a lock on it. We tried it, and it opened. We went inside and the smell hit us like a wall. This sweet, sickly smell filled the whole house, so we held our noses as we walked through. There was no glass on the floor, which was fortunate for our aforementioned bare feet, but there was a lot of dust. It was a shotgun house with maybe 4 small rooms that we could tell, and in the front room there were like 6 or 7 mountain bikes. We figured someone was just storing things here. The bathroom was off this room, and it had a bunch of small, old glass bottles that looked like they dated back to the 1940s or thereabouts. The second room, past the first, had a bunch of old junk in it, but the thing that sticks out in my mind was an old cassette player with a cassette still in it. On the label the cassette said Deborah, the 18th of March, 1993. We didn't really care about this. The third room had more bikes and more junk, and it had a tiny closet off to the side. We wrestled the cobwebs away and saw nothing other than a fucking chainsaw with red-brown residue on it. Alarm bells were going off in our heads now, and even though we tried to rationalize it as just rust, we decided to quickly see what was in the fourth room and then GTFO. We walked into the fourth room and saw that it was completely empty, except for some stairs to the basement, lots of dust, and a small wooden cross. Painted on it were these words: Deborah, the 29th of September, 1963, the 18th of March, 1993. Then we heard a thump from the basement. Then we ran. We ran out the front door, down the path, climbed the fence, through my cousin's backyard, into his house, up the stairs, into his room and under the bed. We stayed there for hours, whispering and speculating and vowing never to go back there again. But we did, and that's another story for another day. You might think this is fictional, and I kinda worded it that way, but I can't make this up. Okay guys, part 2 is in the comments. Update: I actually went back to the house yesterday and it's been torn down. Disappointing but also kind of a relief. Okay, part 2. I went back to my cousin's house a few days later. It aroused no suspicion from our parents since he lived a few blocks away and played together all the time. I brought my little sister with to play with my cousin's younger siblings. My sister was 9 just like my cousin, but I wouldn't dream of telling her. She was a huge blab and my cousin and I had decided that we didn't want anyone to know yet, especially not the adults. As for my cousin, we'll call him Connor from now on. He didn't know I was coming, but he was glad I did, because he had done some research on the house. He told me that in the first owners, an elderly couple who had built the house around the turn of the century, had moved out and never sold the house. They left it to their son when they died, and their son left it to his son. But nobody had ever lived in it since the first owners moved out. so it had been empty since about 1948, confirming my guess about the age of the glass bottles in the bathroom windowsill. The house had just been used to store things ever since. We had already planned for our second visit. We had shoes this time, and we each brought a flashlight. Both of us had our own pistols, handguns, rifles etc., but we didn't dare try to sneak them out of the house. So we each brandished our pocket knives, freshly sharpened for the occasion. We skittered along the path between the old house and the back of his fence. It wasn't a path, really, it was a space about 5-6 feet wide, covered in twigs and leaves and those awful sticker plants. All of this was brown, which was probably why we didn't see the ball of twine on our last adventure. It was nestled against the side of the old house under a pile of leaves. It was about the size of an adult's fist and it was brown, as twine usually is. It looked old, and it was rather heavy. I pocketed it and we moved on. We crept around to the front of the house and quickly slipped inside. We didn't want to linger on the off chance that someone might see us. It was, after all, broad daylight. In the house nothing had changed. It was exactly as we had left it. I did pocket the cassette, as one of you was hoping. The bikes were all still there, so were the chainsaw and the old glass bottles. It appeared that nobody had been in or out since we left. No one probably had. It had only been a few days. We went straight to the last room after poking around a bit in the other three and finding nothing of interest. The cross was still there. After standing around a bit, listening for any thumps, we mustered up all the courage we had and decided to go down to the basement. I know what you're thinking. How cliche. But after creeping down the stairs and around the corner, knives brandished and ready, we found nothing. There were a few piles of leaves here and there, an old empty pop can, and other assorted trash, but otherwise nothing. No sign of anything amiss. So we went back upstairs, dismissing the thump we heard a few days before as just the house settling, or falling apart, considering how old it was, and left. But instead of going back, we decided to check out the other side of the house. I really wish we hadn't. There was a pair of old storm doors that we hadn't seen from the basement. The paint, if there ever had been any, had completely chipped off and so now the doors were grey. They were nailed shut. So we ran back. Neither of us wanted to be left behind to grab a hammer from his dad's toolbox. We went to work on those doors, but there had to have been hundreds of nails there, just nailed in crooked and all over the place. It was getting darker by now, so we said fuck that and went home. Next day I came over again and work continued. We had the doors open about halfway by now, and we could see the cellar underneath. Neither of us could fit through the space, though, so we kept pulling the nails. It was about 3 in the afternoon by the time we had finished, and when we got the doors open we found no stairs and a drop of about 10 feet. We peered into it as far as we could without falling in. It smelled so bad. We were sure it was the source of the smell in the old house. It was pretty tiny, as far as we could tell. It was narrow, and there was a large wall right in the center of it, with narrow paths along both sides, leading into the dark. The floor was stained, and we both knew it was blood. Maybe our kid imaginations were going wild, though, who knows? But one thing I do know is that sound will haunt me forever. The sound on the cassette. We played it that day, on his cassette player. It was static for about 5 minutes, and we were ready to give up. Then a scream. An awful, tortured scream. The screams continued, until they were suddenly ended, right in the middle of one. Then static again. We threw away the cassette, and never spoke of it again. Nor did we ever go in the house again. Something awful happened in that place, unless it was a joke, which it could have been and I hope it was, but I don't think so. We never unraveled the ball of twine. I unintentionally left it at his house that day, lying on the ground by the trampoline. Shortly after they bought a house and moved to an acreage in Ceylon, Minnesota, just 20 miles away. They still own the house. It sits empty now, and they use it to store things, like mountain bikes. Ironically, I still live in Fairmont. I could drive there, get the ball of twine and unravel it, but I think it best to leave the ball of twine where it is. I don't want to have anything to do with that house ever again. I know I worded this like a novelette story, and I did that on purpose. But I did not make this up and I did not embellish. Not really, but the wording makes it seem like I embellished. I have every intention to post these on Arthur this year. Not even kidding. PM me when you post more. Seriously. Okay, why the fuck did I read this thread at 5 AM before going to bed? I personally have quite a few spooky stories, but my mum has a good one, so I will tell hers. When she was younger, her and a group of friends were driving down a desolate road at night, and there was a house that they passed that had a window lit up upstairs, so they slowed down to look, and she said there was a lantern in the window and a man and a woman sat facing each other. She then said that a second man wearing a top hat came into view, walked up behind the woman and started strangling her. At this point my mum and her friends freaked out and drove off. When they went back to see what had happened, they drove up to where they had seen it happen, and it wasn't even a window they had seen, it was a plastic sheet, so they didn't know what to make of it, but they all ended up agreeing they had seen a ghost.